So in all probability we'll be looking at some concert of powers in the Pacific and the Indian Oceans rather than a balance of power, which we often saw in Europe in the 19th century and the early 20th century, which had been a device for an uneasy peace. All of this should tell us that while developments of this kind are as uncertain as they are incapable of prediction, for a country like Australia, they nevertheless hold out huge opportunity. This is why I believe we must always be outgoing. We must be alert, dexterous and positive, and never defensive. For these reasons, I found myself at odds with some of the text of the government's 2009 Defence White Paper. Much of it was unexceptional, saying such things as, and I quote it, "Our primary operational environment more or less ends at the equator." Now, there's nothing much wrong with that. But it went on to discuss what it describes as, quote, "the remote but plausible potential of confrontation," unquote, "between us," end quote again, "a major power adversary," not suggesting who that power might be. Well, obviously it won't be the United States. So then you'll have to take your pick of China, Japan, India or Indonesia. And the paper goes on to outline the kind of military capabilities Australia might need to respond to this contingent risk, foreshadowing an increase in our submarine fleet from 6 to 12 vessels, quadrupling the number of our bigger warships while acquiring cruise missile type offensive capabilities. Taken as a whole, the paper struck an ambivalent tone about our new likely strategic circumstances and what we should do about them, including, for instance, failing to give us an indication as to whether it foresaw that the growth of China's military capabilities was a natural and legitimate thing for a rising economic power, or whether, to the contrary, it was something we should regard as a threat and for which we should plan. It was not clear on this point. Well, the fact is Australia does not know and cannot divine what sort of new order it might obtain as Chinese economic and military power grows in the face of a relative American decline. And complicating that assessment, China rising in the company of other rising regional powers. It won't be rising by itself. There'll be others rising with it. A region of this kind might turn out to be as peaceful and as prosperous for Australia as the one we've had since the end of the Vietnam War. A place where all powers have a role and where Australia is open to have whatever relationship it wants with any one of them. But then again, it might not turn out like this. The region may become more problematic. And this is why a defence policy is a must-have contingency against adverse developments. But importantly, a defence policy is not enough on its own. It has to be woven into a view of the region, and that view can only be encapsulated within a foreign policy. Too often, Australia has created problems for itself when its defence policy has gotten ahead of its foreign policy. And of course the prime examples of that are Vietnam and Iraq. Their defence policy made the commitments, not the foreign policy.